Hey everybody, John here, obviously. And if you follow this channel, you know by now that Canada's Senate has voted Bill C-51 into law, which included a new rule for defense evidence in sexual assault cases. The short version of that is that documentation of consent, whether handwritten notes or I agree to sexy times cell phone videos, are now not admissible in defense evidence unless they're submitted to the court and the accuser and approved of by the court prior to trial, allowing an accuser to modify their accusation to account for or to bypass that evidence of consent. Now, I've been doing videos on Bill C-51 for about a year, and on the wider topic of the absurdist sex panic manifesting as the Me Too movement for much longer. And for something that seems as serious as this, it can sometimes seem like I'm the one lone nut quacking on about an issue that the mainstream seems entirely on the other side of. You know, Me Too is great. Me Too hasn't gone far enough. Putting people on trial on Twitter instead of in a courtroom, that's just groovy. Presumption of innocence is out of fashion. Due process is a tool of women's oppression, and so on and so forth, etc. Of course, that idea of being the lone nut with a paranoid fantasy goes immediately out the window every time a new person contacts Lighthouse whose life has been shattered into wreckage by a fraudulent or a maliciously fabricated accusation. And last week I spoke briefly in my video about consent videos, how feminists are complaining that men are asking for women's consent in a recorded form, and how that concern is going to quickly go away because with the passage of laws like C-51, evidence of consent is being disallowed from the courts anyway. Which brings me to a conversation I was part of this week with. He said, in my work I am consulting to business owners and highly compensated executives, and the fears propagated by the Me Too movement are a daily topic of conversation across the entire strata of his clients. Now, this CPA, who I regard as a bit of a heroic figure, is using some creative problem solving of his own. And one of the things he's doing is suggest to his male clients that rather than asking women to articulate their consent, that men ask women to record a video asking for a man's consent. But of course, not just consent for sex. A woman would be asked to request consent for every particular of a sexual encounter. Now, as much as I admire the reversal of role and responsibility, I am not convinced this is entirely practical. For example, gentlemen, before you try getting a woman to ask you for consent to a sexual encounter in the form of video, see if the woman you're considering taking to bed wants to pay for her half of dinner. It might save you some time and trouble if your breakup fight is in a public place with a number of neutral witnesses. But whether that particular idea works out or not, the gentleman who contacted Lighthouse is correct when he believes that we do need something more creative to depathologize or de-escalate the current state of social level warfare between the sexes. And one of the problems here is that no matter what men might do, seeking consent videos, asking a woman to request consent for sex herself, I've had ideas of my own. One of them was to ask women to sign a declaration of adult self-possession and responsibility before allowing them to join a meeting or enter a booth at a restaurant or apply for a job and so on. But, of course, that idea fails as well. Because where we are now is that men are being required both by law as well as social convention to take complete and total responsibility for all of women's decisions and choices, as if women were men's pets or possessions. Under pressure from women's activists and feminist groups, our government is responding to the push to keep women safe from all harm, up to and including emotional disappointment with a less than perfect dating experience, by making men criminally responsible for all of it, in defiance of the reality that women are people making choices and not, in fact, pets or inanimate objects. And this is not just unfair, it's impossible. It's not viable, which is why we are seeing not just a growth of MGTOW across the world, we are seeing the Mike Pence rule being adopted all across all areas of the business world. Men can be criminalized and ruined for anything they do or don't do. Even acquittal in a court of law won't matter. The media will continue piling on with assertions of guilt in direct defiance of any evidence that an accusation is nonsense. And I do get comments both on YouTube here and on Facebook from women saying things like, this is totally unfair to men. And maybe some of those comments are even sincere. But there is not at present any visibly coherent movement by women to oppose the radical ideologues who fund themselves through our taxes. Occasionally, a woman will step forward in opposition to the worst excesses of Me Too, and she will be piled on by a small minority of radicals whose access to funding and publication makes them seem much more numerous and popular than they actually are. I recall Catherine Deneuve, after denouncing Me Too, being piled on and attacked by feminists, and she backed down under the onslaught, and I don't blame her. And of course, in supporting one group of anti-feminist women or offering defense against the unhinged rage of feminists screeching that non-feminist women are selling out their sisters or they're suffering from internalized misogyny or whatever, that defense of groups is going to mean departing from any position on women as a group or on men as a group. We're going to have to start to care about justice, civil rights, and the liberty of individuals with no regard for their sexual or social demographics, because group-based infighting is the path to disaster. Now, I have my own ideas about undoing the damage and putting us on a path to some kind of functional dynamic between the sexes, but it is a work in progress, and I'll be making a video about it in future. For now, I'm going to just finish this today by saying I hope everybody has a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year, and I hope you keep a reliable and bondable third-party witness with you at all times. Thanks very much for listening, and as always, have a lovely day. And I wasn't kidding about that witness. See you next year.